Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Medieval Podcast, where today I am joined with a fellow podcaster and author. So please, without further ado, welcome Gabriel.
Hi, everyone. Hi, it's good to be here. Luke, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm really excited to be here.
The pleasure is all mine. I'm very excited to get into this. So before we kind of get into the book itself, I'd love to know a bit more about you. So where did your pursuit of history begin, and what/who inspired you to kind of get to where you are now?
All right. So initially, I wasn't interested in history. I was actually more so into graphic design, illustrations, and it was only when I got into middle school that I started liking history. I was the person that everyone wanted on their history team for history quiz day because I
Nice.
remembered all the facts. It wasn't until I got into high school that I had a wonderful teacher named Mrs. Singleton. She was my AP US history teacher, and she made history fun. She made it enjoyable. Found a new passion for history. And from there, it developed from American history to military history to Asian history, which I got my BA in, to classical antiquity, which I get my master's in, or I should say, I got my master's in at San Francisco State 2 years ago. And since then, I've been a big lover of history. And you can't see it, but all around me, I'm like surrounded by my personal library. I have a row of historical fiction books here. To my left, I have my reference books, which is all my research material. And I just love history. I love learning about history. I just enjoy it so very much.
Oh, fantastic. But what I find, I guess, interesting is how you went from basically non-fiction to fiction, because your book, which is what we're going to talk about today, which is Amyntas, the son of Persia, explores an alternate history where Greece loses the Persian Wars. So what inspired you to kind of delve into this scenario, and could you explain in more depth what the book is about?
Of course. So to understand Amyntas, son of Persia, we have to go back all the way to the beginning. So I've always loved to write. That's always been a thing with me ever since I was little. When I was in elementary school, I've always loved to write. And in college, during my undergraduate, I tried to write my first book. I got halfway through, put it on pause, and then when the lockdown happened in early 2020, I was still in my graduate program, just starting out, and then we had to be sent back. Everything's now online. All my classes were online. I didn't have all of my friends. So I had to think, well, what am I going to do? So I went back to my old book, which was titled The Seven Warriors of Earth, and I began working on that again. I remade the outline. And then, after about 2 years, I finally got it finished with the final draft. And after editing and revisions, the Seven Champions of Earth transformed into The
Ah,
Gathering, which became my debut novel this year. And it features the character Amyntas, who is in Amyntas, son of Persia. And how these two relate is in the book, The Gathering, there is a plot point where if the heroes go back to the point of their summoning, they ultimately change their history. They create an alternate timeline. And that is what Amyntas, son of Persia, explores. Now, Amyntas, son of Persia is its own series. It is a what if scenario. If the titular character or one of the titular characters, Amyntas, went back in time and changed his fate. And that's what the book explores, is this alternate Greek world in 479 BC where Amyntas Baru, that is his full name, is now assigned to be the bodyguard of Prince Artaxerxes, who is the son of King Xerxes, the king of kings. And it explores this new world where Greece is under Persian rule, save for Macedonia, which is now sort of like the bastion of the free Greek world. And There's a lot of betrayals, there's a lot of journeys, there's a lot of magic and mystery and fantasy elements. Ultimately, Son of Persia is my own take on the Odyssey story, where you have this main character who goes on this quest from Greece all the way to Carthage, all the way to Sicily, then coming back into Thrace, and then going into Egypt, and then making their way to the very heartland of the Persian Empire. And this is the first of 4 books, which will explore the 4 characters that are introduced in the Gathering. I know there are 7 in the Gathering, but those 4 are in their own series, whereas the other 3 are canon to the Gathering and will lead up to the next several books in the series.
Gosh, wow. I mean, that sounds incredible. I'm intrigued to know. So 4 books. How far have you planned? Do you know how it's going to end, or are you just seeing where it goes? What's your kind of process with that series?
So with the one-off series, the What If series, I have an idea of how it's going to end. It goes almost like in chronological order. So Amyntas is the first book with the first character. And then I'm actually working on the sequel to Amyntas, which is Decimus Rome's Wolf, which will connect to Amyntas, Son of Persia. And I don't want to give too much away, but what it is in that book follows an alternate Roman world where Rome loses to Carthage, and that truly changes Western European history, because now Carthage owns Rome, but they do own Egypt later in the book, and it's a game changer into how Western Europe is. And then the third book, which I don't have the full story, but it's called Symbol, Mistress of an Empire, where it follows a Celt who now is taken to not the Roman Empire, but the successor of the Roman Empire, which is actually in Hispania, with the survivors of Carthage and Carthage and all of that, who's established a new kingdom in Spain. And we see the beginnings of not the Roman Empire coming about, but the birth of the Spanish Empire, or the Iberian Empire. And then the fourth book, which is called Tierra, A Quest for Valhalla, is like the ending of the book series, where it's now all of these characters in this new universe have to come together, because now something is tearing this world apart, and it goes beyond any form of reasoning at that time. And it's going to have a lot of history to it. It's going to have a lot of fantasy elements to it. You're going to have some name drops to old characters. It's going to be a very, very enjoyable series. I guarantee it.
It sounds amazing, and I greatly look forward to it. But it's interesting you say there about how it's kind of a meeting point between history and fantasy. So what kind of research process is behind your book? What kind of sources do you look at? Do you look at sources, or kind of is it predominantly creative writing?
That's actually a good question. So as much as I want to go about with my own take on, what would have happened if the Persians won the Greco-Persian Wars, I want to do something different, because I'm sure, as you know, there's a lot of alternate historical fiction books, which are great, but they do take a lot of creative liberties. So I want to take the time to actually do the research to see, okay, what is probably the most logical hypothesis of, if the Persians won, what would have been the outcome? And I looked a lot of reference books, scholarly journals. I even looked at fiction books to see how did they approach the Persians, because I know a lot of people, when they think of the Persian Empire and Greece, ultimately they will probably think of Zack Snyder's 300, which is actually more of historical fiction, which is based off of the graphic novel. And while that film is good, it is taking a lot more creative liberties. So with this book, I wanted to be accurate to this hypothesis of the Persians won, what's the end result, to actually see that it's not really going to change that much. Yes, Greece is now under Persian rule, but not really much has changed. And I came to that conclusion because we have that in our own timeline. Rome conquered Greece during its heyday, but nothing really happened. It just had new ownership. Yes, the Greeks were now subjects of the Roman Empire. They were now considered Roman citizens. They probably had to adopt more Roman culture. In the case of the Persians, as we know, the Persian Empire had a lot of governors that had a lot more autonomy. And they allowed a lot more cultural and religious tolerance in their empire. They didn't really strive for a cultural uniformity. They didn't strive to say, this is the Persian identity. Well, not necessarily. There's a lot of subjects within the Persian Empire. You have those from Syria, you have those from Judea, you have those from Babylonia, Jerusalem, as far as the Indus Valley. So all of these subjects are Persian by association and their citizenship, but they're still tied to their ancestral roots. Same thing with the Greeks in this book. In the case of Leonidas, who is the satrap of Greece, save for Macedonia, they still have their culture. They still have their identity. Yes, they're going to be slightly different because now they're going to have an influx of other people from the empire, but it's relatively still going to be the same.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's an interesting one because I kind of had my own when coming up with the questions, my own thought process of thinking of my own kind of what if, because I'm always, I won't lie, I've been a bit skeptical about the old what ifs because it's quite a difficult thing to think about, because there's a pivotal moment, for instance, in about the 6th, 7th century when the Arabs are kind of expanding into Spain and into France, and Charles Martel fights them back and hinders their pursuit. And it's always, in my own book, I was saying about this is a pivotal moment in history, because if he had lost, they would have continued into France and, beyond. And I was thinking, I was like, God, what would that actually have looked like? That kind of what if? And it's a very difficult thing to really kind of think of the most kind of logical. Did you have several paths that you looked at? The idea of, okay, what if it was like this, or what if it was like that? Or, did it kind of present itself in a very logical, straightforward way?
Yes, actually I did. And I'm actually going to go back to The Gathering. So initially in The Gathering, the main villain, Kairos, states, as I said, if you go back in time, you're going to change your fate. But what he tells Amyntas in The Gathering is not the same as what's presented in Amyntas, son of Persia. In Amyntas, son of Persia, yes, the Persians win, but the Spartans are a lot more ruthless in their servitude. They actually help the Persians spread all throughout Greece and into Europe through Thrace, through Dacia, through what we consider now Eastern or Southern Eastern Europe, and what would be along the lines of Germany and into Italy. And Amyntas was initially going to be this very hardened, ruthless character. And I'm thinking, I don't necessarily want that for him because it's going to be a huge change. It's going to be a huge shift because Amyntas in The Gathering, he's a very noble character. He's a very honorable character. I still wanted that to be the same in Amyntas son of Persia. So I had to say, okay, let's scrap that. But I did keep the idea of this character being very ruthless, very driven, saying, I want the Persian Empire to expand by any means. And that became the character of Artabanus. Artabanus, who is the advisor to King Xerxes, and who establishes his idea of kind of almost in the sense of like a legalist mentality in ancient China, where legalists believe the citizens don't care, about the rules. All they care about is they're being fed and taken care of. And legalists don't usually share their ideas. They just place pawns in certain scenarios and see, okay, what's going to be the game of chance? Who's going to help me achieve my goals the most? Okay, you're going to do it, so the other ones could just die. That is that ruthless character for Artabanus. And that is the character that Amyntas and his allies fight against, because that is not the Persian Empire that Amyntas serves, Artaxerxes serves, and certainly not what Darius and Xerxes created, or I should say not created, but became a part of and continue to thrive. Artabanus is heavily invested in what it truly means to be Persian, in the sense of like Persian nationality, Persian identity, Persian culture, not Persian by, oh, you're now part of the empire. No, you are going to give up your identity to be one of us.
No, that's really, I find almost it's those aspects that I find really interesting about the kind of the idea of the what ifs. And one thing you kind of mention is this idea of culture, religion, what it would have looked like in Greece. One of which I believe you state is that a unified Hellenistic period under Persian rule.
Yes.
So what kind of, in this kind of world building that you've kind of created, what does things like the culture and religion of Greece look like?
That's actually another good question. So when doing my research, I had to think of, okay, Leonidas is now in charge of all of Greece, save for Macedonia. What's going to happen? Well, first we have to think, well, what was the Persians' main objective? They want Athens to burn. So Athens is pretty much off of the face of the earth. Well, I shouldn't say off the face of the earth. It's just been burned to the ground. The people will definitely rebuild the city, but its power might is going to be changed. Leonidas is now in charge of Greece, and the culture is still going to be the same. It's going to be more unified because now the city-states are no longer fighting against each other. And I think that's another thing we have to note. Ancient Greece was probably one of the worst places to live. If you were in Sparta, if you were a helot, a slave, there was a good chance you're going to be killed. And it must note, or it must be stated, the Spartans, the Spartan elite, made up of only maybe 5% of the general population. The majority of the population was all slave-based, and Sparta was known to have a lot of slave revolts. And in the case of Athens, you had a lot of political killings, political assassinations. Greece was just a horrible place to live. It was very balkanized and fighting to dominate the other. Now that all of Greece is unified, they no longer say, oh, I'm an Athenian, or I am a Spartan, or I'm not a Megarian, or so forth. They still identify as that's their city, that's where they're from. Oh, I'm from the city of Athens, or I'm from Sparta, but they're now sharing the same culture. They're now bringing everything together. And I think that's a really important thing to note, because in the book, I don't say it explicitly, but Sparta is very much different because there's not a lot of slave revolts. Not to say that Persia didn't have their own share of slave revolts. They did, but not to the extent of Sparta. So I don't go much into detail, but Sparta was able to come to an agreement with their slave population. And it's implied, and one could argue that King Xerxes issued a decree giving the slaves the ability to join into the empire as free citizens and contribute to the workforce. So that is now a boost to the population. So now everyone's coming together, save for Macedonia that wants to still obtain that stance that, you know, we are true Greeks. We are not Greek citizens under the Persian Empire. And Alexander the Fourth, I believe, even had the nickname as the lover of all Greece, or lover of all Greeks. And that's actually referenced in Amyntas, son of Persia, as an insult, saying, you lover of all Greeks, you would sell your own people if it meant getting your own way. So Greece in this world is a little bit more unified. The culture is more solid. Democracy still exists because that's one thing that wasn't truly destroyed. And that's another thing, too, that people have to note, that when Persia invaded, they didn't do so on the grounds of democracy versus a monarchy, because Persia is a monarchy at this time. It was more so of regional issues. So democracy is still going to exist. And the Persians even had their own form of democracy, which was a council. So they would still use that to their advantage to help govern. In fact, even at the end of the book, Artaxerxes creates this council which has Leonidas, Heraclius, Protagoras, Socrates, Herodotus, and a lot of other prominent characters that will come about in this new world to balance the powers within Greece to make sure that conflicting leagues don't emerge, which is the ultimate end goal for the Persian Empire, that there is not another Hellenistic league that emerges in the empire.
Gosh, amazing. I mean, so from that, it would kind of appear as though Greece, in a sense, flourishes under Persian rule. Is that what you're kind of, in a way, trying to say?
Yes. And in my research, I came to that possible outcome because it is possibly true. The Persians would have unified all of Greece, again, say from Macedonia. There would have been a lot more influx of people. Trade would have been firmly established. You'd have had Greece making trade contracts with the rest of the empire, getting spices, silks, money from the rest of the world, and being a part of a huge network. That's what thing people don't really take note about the Persian Empire. They were the first to create the first postal system, a national currency, a major road system. This is all before Rome did that. I know we give credit to the Roman Empire for creating this network and saying all roads lead to Rome. But the Persian Empire, at its time in 479 BC, they were the first ones to do it. So now you have this collective unity of this united empire. So in this one possible outcome, Greece is stable. It is united. But I must note that this is only one possible outcome. We don't know what might have happened. All we can do is analyze the sources from the people of the time, even it's men like Herodotus, who recorded the Persian Wars way after they happened and only heard from, second and third parties, as well as modern day historians and modern day scholars who gather intel from these men and women of the past to think, okay, well, this is what they're telling us about the world at that time. We may have to take it with a grain of salt because they're writing it from their own perspective or from this viewpoint. So we have to take that with a consideration. And that's what I did too, that this is just one possible outcome.
No, of course. And I've always been intrigued, just kind of because the whole thing kind of comes about because obviously the Battle of Marathon and various other battles are pivotal in the history. And I'm always intrigued by authors who write battle scenes because I obviously, with my book, wrote about the fall of Rome and various different battles throughout history. And it's very difficult to try and get it right, I think. How did you go about with kind of writing your battle scenes, kind of moving away from the old boring culture stuff and everything? Let's get to the battles. How did you write your battles?
Two things. YouTube videos that are about warfare, and also I have a book on the Encyclopedia of Classical Warfare. So I use those sources for my descriptions of battles. And a lot of my friends who have read my other works have stated I'm very descriptive when it comes to the battle scenes. I like them to be theatrical. I love them to be dramatic. So I always say Amyntas thrust his sword into his enemy. The enemy gurgled, trying to say a word. He drew his blade out. He turned over his shoulder as he did so, elbowed his enemy behind him in the face. So I am very dramatic in how I do like the one-on-one point of views for my characters. But when it comes to the grand scheme of battles like Marathon and Plataea, I like to go with, okay, how is it actively recorded, or how did this happen? And I go from there. I go from like the stop points. And in my Encyclopedia of Classical Warfare, it breaks down, okay, this is what happened first, this is what happened second, and then I use that as a basis. And it must be noted that in the book, Amyntas, Son of Persia, there's actually 3 major battles. Yes, there is the beginning battle with the Battle of Plataea, where the Persians under Mardonius fight against Themistocles and his allies. And of course, the Spartans come in to lead the charge. The second battle is the Battle of, I'm probably going to butcher the word, but it's the Larmi or Jaime. It's another Greek battle where it truly saw the end of the Spartan military force, where it was the smaller Greek state, which its name escapes me, but their military formation was unlike anything in the Greek world, which was the phalanx, which is iconic with the Greeks, but one section of the phalanx had a lot more men. It was deeper. It was more difficult to break apart. So in that battle, which is Amyntas, his allies, Themistocles, Artaxerxes, the Spartans, who are facing against Alexander of Macedonia, with warriors from Carthage, from Iberia, pretty much mercenaries from the Empire of Carthage, or I should say auxiliary forces. And they pretty much end up defeating Alexander's forces because they've never faced an army such as this in this formation. And the third battle was the second battle of Marathon, where it doesn't play out as the first battle, because in that battle, there is a character, Artaxerxes, who has to use an item of power to stop the Carthaginians, who have their Celts, their Iberians, their Libyans, and the rest of their men. They even have war elephants. And keep in mind, the Spartans have never seen war elephants. I know, contrary, again, we see in 300, the movie, there are war elephants, but from my research, the Persians didn't have war elephants. They had war chariots, which was historically accurate, but they did not have war elephants. The Carthaginians were the only ones to employ war elephants. And that is used in that battle. So I like my battles, again, to be very descriptive, to be very dramatic. I like to show it as a movie, that you're watching a battle scene come to life.
Oh, fantastic. It sounds awesome. I guess to kind of wrap the book side of things up, what do you hope that your readers will take away from Amyntas, the Son of Persia?
I think ultimately just it's a good story. It's like the classic hero's journey. I love those kind of stories. The hero's journey is probably the easiest story to reinvent.
Yeah.
And a lot of the characters are very relatable. And I definitely think when it comes to writing historical fiction, especially about characters of the past, a lot of authors, and even myself, sort of struggle, how do I make these characters authentic? And ultimately it comes down to just write who they are. What are their personalities? What are their interests? What are their hobbies? What are their likes and dislikes? And then say where they're from. And then say what clan they're a part of, or what hierarchy they belong to, and go from there. If you start from those 2 points first and try to go down, then you'll kind of struggle because you want to be accurate. And I knew that from the get-go that I was going to take some creative liberties with the creations of these characters. I did want to be as accurate as possible. In the case for Amyntas, his armor is very authentic, except for the very end, where he wears a Corinth helmet, but it's designed to look more like a lion, with the ears, the fangs, and as we know, the Greeks had the horsehair motif. But in this one, his motif is like a lion's mane. It goes all the way down to his shoulders. And that's a reference to a character that will come about later in the book. Well, I should say it's mentioned, and that is Ixander. And in the book at the very end, Ixander is that universe's Alexander the Great. So Amyntas Bardaru is the father of Alexander the Great, or Ixander, his Persian name, who serves under Darius II, who is the son of Artaxerxes. And together they, continue to strengthen the Persian Empire. And I wanted these characters to be likable. I wanted there to be struggle. I wanted there to be a conflict. I wanted character development and growth. And I wanted all my characters to have a major role into the story. Even if they were side characters, they still contribute to the story.
Sounds excellent. Sounds like it's going to be a fantastic book and series as well.
Thank you.
So it's not the only thing that you do, though, because you also have a podcast.
Yes, that's right.
Tales from the Wandering Scribe. How comes you got into the world of podcasting as well? Then, what kind of motivated you to get into it? What kind of stuff do you do on your channel?
That's actually a good question. So initially, I didn't want to do podcasting. This is probably around 2020, 2021. I was just starting to write on Inkit, where most of my stories are still on. And I came into contact with they're now good friends of mine who had their own podcast, and they were authors. And they want to know about, my writing experience, my thought process, what are my inspirations, how I go about, the outline. And I thought, this is actually pretty good. And so I began Tales from the Wandering Scribe on Anchor, and it was solely just audio interviews. And from there, I had a lot of feedback. People enjoyed it. My first guest was Kim Appelgren. She's a South African-based author, and she's one of my dear close friends. And she's actually one of the first people that I met during the lockdown virtually. And I met a whole bunch of other people, Timothin, Lady Rowan, Autumn Amber, and so forth. And then after season 1, I decided I want to do something with this podcast. So that's when I hopped on LinkedIn and I met a whole bunch of new people. And that's when I decided, let's combine the two. Let's actually do historians interview. Let's actually talk about historians who are authors and learn their thought process. And that just snowballed into this wonderful, wonderful situation. And I got to meet people like Michael Stroud, Courtney Atkins, Jackson Van Uden, a lot of historical reenactors, Joanna Peterson, Mark Scheider, who is Napoleon, and a whole bunch of other people, which I'm so happy to have met. And then from there, it was the end of 2022 when, after talking with friends and family, they said, you should do a YouTube channel. And I held off against it because I didn't know, I'm not a YouTuber, I'm not a content creator. But then they said, you can do this. You can do video interviews, actually show your audience the guests that you're talking with, and it just went from there. And this year now, it will be almost a year since I've been on YouTube. And I've met a whole bunch of new people. I interview the same people now. And then I created on my YouTube channel, which was a YouTube exclusive, The Historians Lounge, which was a series that focused on myself and another historian talking about an historical topic. I've had guests such as Joanna Peterson, Angelina Cowell, Michael Stroud, Courtney Atkins, Lynn Marks, Christine, and a whole bunch of other historians, and learning a wide range of topics from the colonial American period, food and culture, the Roman Navy, the Confederate Navy, African Americans in military history, Lincoln's life before he went to politics, the history of the United States Marines, and so forth. And since then, I've loved this, and it also allowed me a platform to talk about my own works. In fact, YouTube was the platform that I decided to, make a shout out of my book, The Gathering, and read the first 2 chapters on camera. And it was also the place where I decided I'm going to promote the sequel, Amyntas, Son of Persia. And honestly, I'm happy that I've done it because I've been able to meet a wide range of new people and connect with so many people from different historical backgrounds, disciplines, and experiences.
Oh, fantastic! No, it definitely is. I mean, I as well have met amazing people and done, you know, had brilliant opportunities because of it. So it's definitely something that's been worthwhile. But I'm intrigued to know. I mean, is there a specific moment that's been very impactful for you on your podcasting journey? Maybe it was a certain guest that you got, or just a conversation that you came away from. You were like, oh, that was just brilliant.
That's a really tough question to answer because all my guests have been fantastic. It's really hard to choose a memorable one. If I had to choose a memorable one, it would again be with my friend Kim Applegren. And she was my first guest on my YouTube channel. And when I finished the video, I realized the day that we did the first YouTube interview on my YouTube channel, it was also the same day that I did my first podcast episode on Anchor. I was like, whoa, how cool is that? So she was my first on Anchor, and she was my first on my YouTube channel. And it's actually really interesting because she is still on Anchor, my #1 most listened podcast episode. And on YouTube, she is probably in my author's interview. She's probably still the most watched. I feel like maybe like the top 5. It's incredible. And I've been able to meet a wide range of so many young authors, experienced authors as well, from Rob Shackelford from Australia, P.L. Riven, who is another author on LinkedIn, Raven White, who has her own publishing house in the United States. A lot of other historical authors too, which was nice. So it's really hard for me to choose, but definitely Kim would be the most memorable if I had to pick one.
Got ya. I'm going to follow that up now with another difficult question, which is,
okay.
So, who is then someone that you'd love to have on as a guest?
Oh, someone who I'd love to have on as a guest. You know, there is one author that I really want to have. I forget her name. She's actually a published author, and we talked via email, and she was really interested in doing it, but she was doing her book tour, and I believe, I forget her name, but she wrote a alternate historical fiction book called She Who Became the Sun, which is an alternate take on the rise of the Ming Dynasty, where in that book, it's a fictional character who takes on her brother's identity. And in real history, her brother is the person who establishes the Ming Dynasty, who overthrows the Yuan Dynasty. And when I read that book, I was just blown away. I was like, I need to get this person on my YouTube channel. So we talked about it, and she really wants to do it, but you know, it's just schedule conflicts with book tours and all that stuff, and I understand, but the fact that she was interested was, you know, simply incredible.
No, fantastic. Well, that is all for now. We have one final question, which is, what do you have coming up? So obviously, clearly a lot of books, but are there any future projects, future podcasts that we should be looking out for? You know, what's going on?
So be on the lookout for the next episode of the Historians Lounge, which is dropping this month, and then in November you will have another Historians Lounge episode, and then hopefully my goal is to publish the sequel to Amyntas, Son of Persia, with Decimus Rome's Wolf, which follows Decimus Aquila, a Roman cavalryman from 216 BC from the Battle of Cannae. who now has to become this leader of his people for the survivors of the Battle of Cannae and the Roman people who were pushed out of their homes by Hannibal and establish a new kingdom in Spain. And I don't just write historical fiction, I also write fantasy, and I have it with me here. So apologies off screen for a moment. But the next book I have coming, and this is still a work in progress, is Michael, the Last Angel of Earth, which is my first attempt in fantasy where it follows Michael, the warrior angel from Christian and Jewish tradition, who now finds himself the last angel on earth after the end of days happens much earlier than expected. And he's now a Nephilim. He's no longer a warrior angel or a heavenly angel. He now has to wander the world trying to gather allies and rectify his mistake. And the people on the cover, you have Van Hilder, who is a Valkyrie from Norse mythology. You have Ruzla, a gargoyle from France. And this character is Horus, the Prince of Egypt, who now is in exile living in Spain and works as a bounty hunter.
You're a very busy person.
Yes.
Oh no, but it all sounds absolutely wonderful. Is Amyntas available yet for purchase?
So Amyntas, Son of Persia, is slated to be released on October 10th. I published through BN Press, so it has to take about a few days. So most likely I'll upload it or say put on sale over the weekend. So by Monday or Tuesday, it will be available, and it'll be available in print and ebook too.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, best of luck with it. It sounds like an absolutely fantastic book, and I'm sure you'll sell tons of them.
Thank you. Now, I must state, if you want to understand the world that Amyntas is living in and the references to the Gathering, because there are references, then you must read the first book, The Gathering, because there's a lot of references to characters in this story, as well as the major plot point which launched Amyntas, Son of Persia.
There you go. Well, thank you once again for coming on. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm really glad that we got this going. And that is everything.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome. As I said, this has probably been like the first interview that I've had in a long time where now I'm the guest. So this was simply a wonderful experience.
No, brilliant. Well, thank you very much once again. And thank you everyone for watching. That is it for now. And I'm sure we'll have another guest on very soon. I've got a couple lined up, so they'll be coming out as and when, really. So stay tuned for those. But thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.